Greetings everyone. This week I'm going to provide the summary for Johnston Chapter 10, Radical Behaviorism. The opening scenario of this chapter explores the dilemma of a new BCBA practitioner struggling with the confidence of what she is capable of from her ABA coursework, as she is aware that her supervisor's master's program covered more than her program. The main conflict is her supervisor confronted her regarding her casual phrasing when discussing the case and that phrasing did not fall in with behaviorism language. The specific changes suggested were not the issue, but the implication that this problem could affect her judgment as a practitioner. The realization was that her supervisor's program had a major emphasis on radical behaviorism that she did not receive. This accounted for a lot of differences in the language they both used. The first section of this chapter is about the philosophy of behavior analysis. Johnston explains that radical behaviorism is not the science of behavior, but a comprehensive philosophy that serves as the underpinnings of that science. As we've discussed, it states that behavior is entirely physical by nature and is susceptible to influence only by other physical events. One of the most important features is that verbal behavior is no different than any other kind of behavior. All verbal behavior is fully explained by operant learning. This also allows for us to examine private events as well as public ones. Johnston explains that it is also crucial within radical behaviorism for researchers or investigators' behavior to work the same way as subjects' behavior. That is, that behavior is a subject matter and isn't subject to mentalistic explanations. And that the researchers do not have any special type of behavior needed to understand the subject's behavior. The rejection of mentalism creates this different type of continuity between the science and the philosophy. Behavior should not be used to understand and make conclusions on how the mind works. Also, behavior cannot be adequately explained by the physiology that makes it possible, largely because there is still too much guessing and assuming going to use physiological understanding can supplement but cannot fully explain laws of behavior. If we look at box 10.1 on page 185, it explains further the relationship between behavior analysis and neuroscience. The most important takeaway in this section is that neuroscience may be able to explain how certain responses can be possible, but it does not explain why behavior occurs and therefore cannot be used to explain cause. Radical behaviorism allows for private events to be considered as public events are. However, the role of private events must be restricted to what we have learned about learning processes through observable behavior. It allows for behavior scientists to approach private events so to not fall into mentalism traps or creating theoretical terms for private events. Johnston wanted to provided historical context in the next section to explain how we got to behavior. So, when people were trying to understand behavior starting in the 18th, 19th century, philosophy and mentalism were the dominant ways of doing so. But there was a struggle to convert these things into a science. When psychology was in its beginnings, the introspection method was developed, but its scientific merit was questioned. Then we get John B. Watson's behaviorism, which did a science for behavior using the classical SR understanding of behaviorism. This is also related to Pavlov's work. Because Watson's work, behaviorism, does not explain all of the different dimensions of behavior, it then moved on to SOR, So stimulus, organism, response. So the O implies that there's something within the organism that mediates the stimulus response relationship. This also birthed operationism. So in looking at some of these possible within organism constructs, operationism is a way of trying to make these ideas measurable and observable, and then therefore studyable. However, this brings mentalism back into the picture. So Skinner came along with his behaviorism, which eventually became radical behaviorism, which made sure to eliminate all mentalism and its interpretations. And then his laboratory research program, the work through that, spurned on applied behavior analysis. Johnston goes on to compare radical behaviorism to methodological behaviorism. So in this course, through different readings, we have talked about how methodological behaviorism is strict on only focusing on public observable behavior and and ignoring private events. But also, methodological works off of conventional common experimental practices, and it uses several different assumptions. If you look at assumption C on page 193, the constructing of logical domains in order to explain findings allows for mentalism within the researcher's behavior, because it explains scientific reasoning as a special type of behavior that is required to understand the behavior of the subject. And if you remember, in radical behaviorism, it needs to be equal. There shouldn't be a special kind of behavior in order to understand this behavior in the subject. So, is radical behaviorism a matter of opinion? Radical behaviorism is not so much an argument as it is a tactic for better science. We should be encouraged that the applied science of behavior analysis generates a growing amount of demonstrable effectiveness in different populations. And also, it is not an unimpeachable truth, but a lens that avoids problems and produces better science. We must be wary, though, that if we disagree with different aspects of radical behaviorism, we need to really examine our alternative arguments, because these could affect you as a practitioner. The last section is on selling radical behaviorism. Some of this is about selling it to yourself, but also others. So Johnston expresses that hopefully that we've embraced radical behaviorism on its intellectual merits as well as its practical implications. It is also important to speak in an internally consistent way about behavior. Each puzzle piece we collect on this journey makes the whole picture of the theory coalesce to make more sense. Also, embracing radical behaviorism promotes clinical efficacy, making us better practitioners. When selling radical behaviorism to others, one of the benefits is that your relaying of observations will often provide a unique point of view that notices things others do not. Other scientific findings are pretty well digested by the general public, with the exception of biology's reliance on evolution. Radical behaviorism, however, challenges people's everyday language and the way people think about their own and others' behavior. That's a big thing to ask from presenting your findings. Other sciences don't really challenge people quite that way. So instead of trying to fully convert people to radical behaviorism, perhaps the solution is not to change the people's language, but rather convey the understanding of what causes or controls behavior. Being able to explain how contingencies work and what factors are at play for a current behavior and interest is more important than completely converting the language of others. My discussion question for this chapter is, in the selling In the Selling Radical Behaviorism section, it opens with the 5 reasons this book has argued for needing to understand this conceptual framework. All of these are important, but I believe the third one about being strong enough in radical behaviorism to be able to convince clients and other professionals to support ABA procedures is most important. That seems to be the biggest barrier for ABA in arguing for its use. Which of these 5 arguments on page 196 do you find to be most important to yourself as a future ABA practitioner, and why?